Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The Flight That Changed Everything. Amara Hayes leaned back in her VIP lounge chair, her leather-bound notebook balanced delicately on her lap. It was a journal that carried the weight of years, ideas, dreams, business strategies, and the occasional personal reflection. A modest yet elegant gold clasp secured the pages, symbolic of the meticulous way Amara approached life. Today, she had a reason to celebrate. After years of hard work, negotiations, and relentless determination, she had closed the biggest deal of her career. The acquisition of a luxury travel startup was her way of breaking into an industry she had long admired. The lounge buzzed with subdued conversations, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint hum of distant announcements. Amara's eyes scanned the room, landing on passengers in various states of travel-induced fatigue. She took a deep breath and glanced at her watch. 30 minutes until boarding. Amara's thoughts drifted to her upbringing. Born in a modest neighborhood in Atlanta, Georgia, she had grown up with parents who emphasized hard work and resilience. Her father, a mechanic, often came home with grease-stained hands, but always found time to encourage her to dream big. Her mother, a teacher, instilled in her the importance of education and community. Together, they had built a foundation that carried Amara through the challenges of navigating spaces not always welcoming to someone who looked like her. As she sipped her coffee, a distinct voice interrupted her thoughts. "I need to speak to someone in charge," the woman said, her tone sharp enough to turn heads. Amara looked up to see Clara Whitman, an older white woman dressed impeccably in a cream blazer and pearls. Clara exuded an air of entitlement, her every movement deliberate and calculated. She was speaking to a lounge attendant, who nodded nervously. Amara dismissed the interaction and returned her focus to her notebook, flipping through pages of ideas for her new venture. Travel had always been more than a luxury to her, it was a symbol of freedom, a way to connect with the world on her own terms. Her dream was to create an experience where anyone, regardless of their background, could feel valued and welcomed. The announcement for her flight to New York came over the speakers, and Amara closed her notebook, slipping it into her designer bag. She gathered her belongings and made her way to the gate. As she approached the boarding line, she noticed Clara again, this time standing a few feet ahead of her. Their eyes met briefly, and Amara offered a polite smile, which Clara did not return. Amara was among the first to board, her first-class seat waiting for her in 1A. She had chosen the seat deliberately, savoring the privacy and comfort it offered. As she settled in, a flight attendant approached with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Hayes. If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you," Amara replied, her voice calm and self-assured. The cabin slowly filled, the usual shuffle of passengers storing luggage and finding their seats, creating a quiet commotion. Amara opened her notebook once again, jotting down a few thoughts as the last passengers boarded. Moments later, she heard a voice that made her pause. "Excuse me, but there must be a mistake," Clara said, her tone loud enough to carry through the cabin. Amara looked up to see Clara standing in the aisle, her gaze fixed on the seat Amara occupied. The flight attendant stepped forward. "Is there an issue, ma'am?" "Yes," Clara said, her voice tight. "I believe there's been a mix-up. This seat is clearly not meant for her." The words hung in the air, like an unexpected storm cloud. Amara's grip on her pen tightened, but her face remained composed. She had encountered moments like this before, moments where the implicit bias of others became explicit in the most ungraceful ways. "I assure you, there's no mistake," the flight attendant replied, her smile faltering slightly. "Ms. Hayes is in the correct seat." Clara's expression hardened. "Well, I'd like to see her ticket." Amara closed her notebook with deliberate calm and looked up at Clara. "Is there something you'd like to ask me directly?" she said, her tone firm but measured. Clara hesitated, clearly unprepared for Amara's poised response. It seems unusual, that's all." "What seems unusual?" Amara asked, raising an eyebrow. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some pretending not to notice, while others stared openly. Before Clara could respond, the flight attendant interjected. "Ma'am, I assure you everything is in order. Please take your seat so we can prepare for takeoff." But Clara wasn't ready to back down. "I've flown this route for years," she said, her voice tinged with indignation. "And I've never seen," she trailed off, as if realizing she had already said too much. Amara decided to end the exchange. "Perhaps it's time to expand your horizons," she said, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Clara's face flushed, but she said nothing further. The flight attendant guided her to her seat in 1C, directly across the aisle from Amara. The cabin settled once more, but the air was heavy with unspoken tension. Amara took a deep breath, allowing the moment to pass. She opened her notebook again, determined to focus on what truly mattered. But as she began writing, she noticed Clara whispering to another passenger, her gestures pointed and deliberate. Moments later, the flight attendant returned, looking uneasy. "Ms. Hayes," she began, her voice apologetic, "I hate to ask this, but would you mind switching seats? It might make things easier." Amara looked up, her expression unreadable. "Easier for whom?" she asked. The question hung in the air, challenging the status quo in a way that was both simple and profound. Amara knew she had a choice to make: acquiesce for the sake of peace or stand her ground for the sake of principle. With a calm determination, she reached for her phone and dialed a number. "Good afternoon, this is Amara Hayes," she said when the call connected. "I need to speak with someone in charge." What followed would not only redefine the course of this flight but also ripple far beyond it, challenging perceptions and inspiring change in ways no one could have anticipated. A call that changed everything. The atmosphere in the cabin was tense as Amara Hayes spoke softly into her phone. Her voice, calm yet assertive, carried a weight that turned heads. Even the flight attendant, who had been standing by awkwardly, seemed riveted by the conversation she was only partially privy to. "Yes, I'm currently on flight 746, and I've encountered an issue with the crew's conduct," Amara said, her words deliberate. She paused, listening to the response on the other end. "Yes, I'll hold." Clara Whitman, now seated but still visibly displeased, leaned slightly toward her aisle-mate, whispering conspiratorially. Her smug expression suggested she believed Amara's efforts were futile, another small act of defiance, quickly extinguished. But Amara had not built her empire by giving up or shrinking herself to fit into spaces not designed for her. Passengers around them were now openly observing the interaction, their curiosity piqued. Some wore expressions of discomfort, others of quiet approval, and a few appeared indifferent, content to scroll through their phones and ignore the unfolding drama. Amara, unbothered by the audience, remained focused on her call. "Yes," she said after a moment. "Please connect me to the head of customer relations." "No, I'm not interested in filing a complaint through the standard process. This requires immediate escalation." The flight attendant, sensing the gravity of the situation, leaned in. "Ms. Hayes, I assure you we're doing everything we can to resolve this," she said, her tone conciliatory. "If you'd prefer, we can discuss this privately." Amara held up a hand, silencing her gently but firmly. "I appreciate your concern, but this is not a matter for private discussion. It's a matter of principle." Clara scoffed audibly, crossing her arms and muttering something under her breath. Amara's eyes flicked toward her briefly, the smallest hint of a smile playing on her lips. Clara's discomfort was a symptom of something far larger, a deeply ingrained belief system that saw Amara's presence in that seat as an anomaly, a mistake to be corrected. Amara's call continued. "Yes, I'm here. Thank you for taking my call on such short notice," she said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "I'd like to inform you of a situation that reflects poorly on your company's commitment to inclusivity and customer service. I'll start with the behavior of one of your passengers." Her words were precise, her tone unwavering. She recounted the events without embellishment, her clarity painting a picture of the subtle yet insidious ways bias had attempted to creep into her journey. The man on the other end of the line, a senior executive at the airline, listened intently, interrupting only to ask clarifying questions. Clara's confidence began to falter. She shifted in her seat, glancing around the cabin and realizing that the tide of public opinion might not be in her favor. The murmurs among passengers had grown louder, and some were even recording the exchange on their phones. "Ms. Hayes," the executive said after Amara had finished speaking, his voice clear even through the phone's small speaker, "I want to personally apologize for what you've experienced. This is not reflective of our company's values, and I assure you that we will take immediate steps to address it. I'll have someone from my team contact the crew right away." "Thank you," Amara replied. "I trust you'll also be documenting this incident for internal review. I expect to see tangible action, not just an apology." "You have my word," the executive said firmly. "If there's anything else we can do to make this right, please don't hesitate to let me know." "There is one more thing," Amara said, her voice softening but losing none of its power. "I'd like to ensure that the rest of this flight proceeds without further incident. I trust your team can facilitate that." "Consider it done," the executive replied. "And again, I sincerely apologize." Amara ended the call and placed her phone on the tray table, her expression unreadable. She turned to the flight attendant, who looked both relieved and embarrassed. "Will there be any further issues, or can I expect to enjoy my seat as planned?" Amara asked. "No, Ms. Hayes," the flight attendant said quickly. "There won't be any more issues. I'll personally make sure of it." Clara, meanwhile, seemed at a loss for words. Her cheeks were flushed, and she avoided making eye contact with anyone, fiddling nervously with the clasp of her purse. Amara could feel the weight of the older woman's gaze even as Clara tried to pretend she was uninterested in the outcome of the call. But the matter wasn't quite settled. A few minutes later, the captain emerged from the cockpit, his face calm but serious. He approached Amara's seat and introduced himself. "Ms. Hayes, I'd like to personally apologize for what's happened here today," he said, his voice low enough that only those nearby could hear. "Our crew has been briefed, and we'll be conducting a thorough review of this incident after the flight." Amara nodded, her expression softening slightly. "I appreciate that, Captain. I trust you'll ensure this doesn't happen again, to me or anyone else." "Absolutely," he said. "If there's anything I can do to make your experience better, please let me know." "Just ensure a smooth flight," Amara said. "That's all I ask." The captain nodded and returned to the cockpit, leaving the cabin to settle back into its pre-flight routine. The murmurs among passengers quieted, though the atmosphere remained charged. Amara reopened her notebook, flipping to a fresh page. The interaction had left her both reflective and resolute. Moments like this were a reminder of why she worked so hard, not just for her own success, but to pave the way for others who might follow. Clara, still visibly uncomfortable, finally spoke, her voice low but audible enough for Amara to hear. "You didn't have to make such a scene," she muttered. Amara didn't look up from her notebook. "A scene is only necessary when the silence allows injustice to thrive," she said simply. The older woman didn't respond, and Amara returned to her writing. In her mind, she was already crafting ideas for an op-ed she would publish after landing, one that would use this incident as a springboard to discuss broader issues of equity and respect in public spaces. As the plane began to taxi, Amara closed her notebook and leaned back in her seat, a small smile on her lips. The journey had barely begun, but she knew it would leave an impact far beyond its destination. What Clara and others like her had yet to realize was that Amara Hayes was not just another passenger. She was a force of change, and this was only the beginning. The ripples of defiance. As the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, the tension in the first-class cabin had not entirely dissipated. Passengers still stole glances at Amara Hayes, some with admiration, others with discomfort. Clara Whitman sat stiffly in her seat across the aisle, her body turned away from Amara as though physical distance could erase the memory of their exchange. For Amara, however, the incident was already becoming a teachable moment, a spark that ignited a deeper reflection on how moments of subtle oppression could be transformed into opportunities for progress. Amara leaned her head back, closing her eyes briefly, allowing the soft hum of the engines to wash over her. She needed a moment to collect her thoughts, not out of fear or regret, but because she understood the significance of what had just transpired. As much as it had been a personal affront, it was also emblematic of the struggles countless others faced daily in spaces where they were seen as interlopers rather than equals. The flight attendant interrupted her thoughts with a soft voice. "Ms. Hayes," she said, standing a step away, her expression a mix of professionalism and apology. "Can I offer you something to make your flight more comfortable? Perhaps a glass of wine or one of our premium meals?" Amara studied the young woman for a moment. She wasn't angry with the crew member specifically, she was likely a pawn in a larger system that had trained her to prioritize convenience over justice. Still, Amara understood the power of holding even small players accountable. "I'll take a glass of your best red wine," Amara replied, her tone polite but firm. "And please, let your captain know I appreciate his intervention." The flight attendant nodded, her relief palpable, and disappeared toward the galley. Amara turned her attention to the window, watching the endless expanse of clouds drift by. She reached for her notebook once more, flipping past the pages filled with business strategies and personal goals. On a fresh page, she began to write, the words flowing from her as if they had been waiting for this very moment. "Moments of truth are rarely convenient," she began. "They demand action when silence feels easier, and they require courage when retreat seems safer." She continued writing, her pen moving steadily across the page. Her words were not just for herself, but for an audience she had yet to define. Perhaps it would be an article, a speech, or even a chapter in her long-contemplated book on leadership and resilience. Whatever form it took, she knew it would carry the essence of this moment, a moment when she refused to be diminished. Her thoughts were interrupted by the ping of a notification on her phone. Though airplane mode prevented external messages, the airline's in-flight Wi-Fi allowed select alerts to come through. Amara glanced at the screen. The notification was from her social media manager. Trending alert, incident on Flight 746. Passenger calls out bias in first-class cabin. Viral within 15 minutes. Amara's eyes widened slightly. She had been so engrossed in the immediate confrontation that she hadn't considered how quickly news could spread in the digital age. Curious, she opened the airline's Wi-Fi browser and navigated to her social media account. Sure enough, her name was trending, accompanied by videos and posts from passengers who had recorded the interaction. One video, in particular, had garnered thousands of views within minutes. It captured the moment Amara calmly addressed the flight attendant's request for her to move. Her poised response, "Easier for whom?" had struck a chord with viewers. Comments flooded in, ranging from admiration for her composure to outrage at the bias she had faced. "This is why representation matters," one user had written. "Amara Hayes is a queen for handling this with such grace." Others shared personal stories of similar experiences, creating a growing thread of solidarity and shared resilience. It wasn't just about Amara anymore, it was about the collective struggles of those who had been told, in subtle and not-so-subtle ways, that they didn't belong. As Amara scrolled through the comments, her initial surprise gave way to a quiet determination. She had always understood the power of her platform, but this incident had amplified her reach in ways she hadn't anticipated. She drafted a quick post, attaching a photo of her open notebook, its pages filled with the beginnings of her thoughts. "Moments like these remind me why I do what I do. Change starts with a refusal to accept the unacceptable. To those who feel unseen, unheard, or undervalued, you are not alone. We rise together." Within minutes, her post was being shared across platforms, accompanied by hashtags like #WeBelong, #RepresentationMatters, and #AmaraTakesFlight. The flight attendant returned with her wine, setting it down carefully on the tray table. "Thank you," Amara said, her voice warm. The woman lingered for a moment, hesitating as though she wanted to say something more. I just wanted to say, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I admire how you handled everything earlier. It made me think about how I can do better too. Amara smiled, her expression softening. Growth starts with reflection, she said. What matters is what you do moving forward. The attendant nodded, a faint blush coloring her cheeks, and retreated to tend to other passengers. Amara returned to her notebook, jotting down a note about the interaction. She knew it was a small victory, but even small victories mattered in the larger battle for equity and respect. Across the aisle, Clara remained silent. Her earlier defiance had crumbled, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of how her actions had backfired. For the first time, she seemed to realize that Amara was not someone to be dismissed lightly. Clara shifted uneasily, avoiding Amara's gaze, her earlier indignation replaced by a quiet, reluctant introspection. Amara didn't need Clara's apology. She didn't need her acknowledgement. What mattered was the broader impact, the ripple effect that had begun the moment she refused to give up her seat. The flight continued uneventfully, the cabin settling into a quiet rhythm. Amara closed her notebook and leaned back, her mind already turning to the next steps. This wasn't just a moment to savor, it was a moment to build upon. She would use her platform, her resources, and her voice to ensure that the lessons of this flight resonated far beyond its passengers. As the plane began its descent into New York, Amara felt a sense of clarity and purpose wash over her. The journey was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. After all, this was her calling, not just to succeed, but to lead, inspire, and create a world where everyone had a seat at the table, or in this case, a seat in 1A. A seat at the table. The plane landed smoothly at John F. Kennedy International Airport, and Amara Hayes gathered her belongings, her movements unhurried. She could feel the weight of eyes on her, some lingering out of curiosity, others out of admiration. The cabin crew thanked passengers as they exited, their smiles a little more reserved when they turned to Clara Whitman, who briskly walked off without so much as a glance back. Amara, however, paused near the flight attendant who had addressed her earlier. Thank you for following through, she said softly, offering a genuine smile. The young woman looked relieved and nodded, gratitude evident in her eyes. The terminal was bustling with travelers, the cacophony of rolling suitcases and overlapping announcements filling the air. Amara's phone buzzed incessantly in her pocket, but she ignored it for now, preferring to absorb the moment. The city she loved, its unrelenting pace, its unapologetic diversity, was waiting, and she was ready to meet it. Outside the gate, a familiar face greeted her. Derek Wilson, her longtime business partner and one of her closest confidants, stood with his tablet in one hand and a wide grin on his face. You've done it again, Amara, he said as she approached. Amara raised an eyebrow. Done what? Blown up the internet, Derek replied, holding up his tablet to show her the trending news. Headlines from major outlets had picked up the story, Black billionaire defies bias at 35,000 feet and Amara Hayes, a lesson in grace under fire. She groaned playfully. I didn't intend for that to happen. I know, Derek said, his grin widening. That's what makes it even better. It's authentic. People see that. Amara glanced at the screen, scrolling through the headlines and the overwhelmingly positive responses. While she had hoped for a quieter day, she couldn't deny the importance of this moment. It wasn't about her ego, it was about the message. Let's talk in the car, she said, motioning toward the exit. There's work to do. In the sleek black town car that whisked them through Manhattan's crowded streets, Amara and Derek strategized. The incident on the flight had sparked a global conversation, and Amara saw an opportunity to channel the momentum into meaningful action. I've been thinking, Amara began, her voice steady. This isn't just about one flight or one confrontation. It's about the systems that allow these moments to happen. What if we used this as a catalyst for something bigger? Like what? Derek asked, intrigued. A foundation, Amara said, the words coming to her as she spoke. Focused on dismantling bias in public and professional spaces. We could start with initiatives in training for airline crews, expand into corporate diversity programs, and even create scholarships for underrepresented students in aviation and hospitality. Derek's eyes lit up. You're talking about systemic change. This could be huge. It has to be, Amara said firmly. We've spent too long fighting these battles in isolation. It's time to connect the dots and address the root causes. By the time they arrived at her office in Midtown, the idea had taken shape. Amara's executive assistant, Rachel, was already waiting in the conference room, a stack of printed reports in hand. She was a sharp, efficient woman in her early 30s who had been with Amara since the early days of her business ventures. Good to see you back, Rachel said, handing Amara a list of calls and meeting requests that had poured in during her flight. You're officially the face of resilience and grace today. Amara smiled wryly. Let's hope I can live up to the title. The three of them dove into planning. By the time they broke for lunch, they had sketched out the framework for the Equality Elevated Foundation, an organization dedicated to creating equitable experiences in spaces where bias often went unchecked. They envisioned partnerships with airlines, hospitality groups, and corporate leaders to provide training, mentorship, and opportunities for marginalized groups. That afternoon, Amara met with a journalist from a prominent news outlet who had requested an exclusive interview. The journalist, a middle-aged black woman named Nina Reyes, had followed Amara's career closely and was thrilled to sit down with her. I have to say, I've been waiting for this moment, Nina said as they settled into a quiet corner of Amara's office. Your story on that flight has struck a nerve. People are calling you the modern-day Rosa Parks of first class. Amara laughed lightly. That's humbling, but I wouldn't go that far. I was just standing, or sitting, for what was right. That's exactly why it resonates, Nina said, leaning forward. People see themselves in your story. But tell me, what went through your mind when you made that call on the plane? Amara paused, choosing her words carefully. I thought about my parents, she said. My father worked with his hands every day, and my mother taught children to dream big. They taught me that dignity isn't something anyone can take from you, it's something you carry with you. That's what gave me the strength to make that call. I wasn't just speaking for myself, I was speaking for every person who's been told they don't belong. The interview continued, Amara's words resonating with Nina, who nodded in agreement at every turn. By the time they wrapped up, Amara felt a renewed sense of purpose. The story wasn't about a single flight, it was about a movement. That evening, Amara attended a private event at one of New York's most prestigious hotels. It was a gathering of business leaders, philanthropists, and influencers, many of whom had already heard about her day. As she moved through the room, she was met with handshakes, words of support, and even a few whispered thank yous from those who had faced similar struggles. One encounter stood out. A young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, approached hesitantly. She was dressed elegantly but appeared nervous, clutching a small notebook in her hands. Ms. Hayes, she said softly, I just wanted to say thank you. I saw the video of what happened on your flight. I'm an aviation student, and, well, seeing someone like you stand up for yourself reminded me why I chose this path. It's not just about flying planes. It's about creating a world where everyone feels they belong. Amara smiled, her heart swelling with pride. What's your name? She asked. Danielle, the young woman replied. Well, Danielle, Amara said, placing a hand on her shoulder, you're already on your way. And when you graduate, I hope you'll reach out. We'll need leaders like you for the foundation we're building. Danielle's eyes lit up. I will. Thank you, Ms. Hayes. As the night wore on, Amara reflected on the day's events. What had begun as an ordinary flight had transformed into something extraordinary. She had been tested, and she had risen to the challenge, not just for herself, but for countless others who needed to see that it was possible to stand tall, even in the face of adversity. And as she looked out over the glittering city skyline, she knew one thing for certain, this was only the beginning. The seat she had refused to give up was more than a place in first class. It was a symbol of the table she was determined to build, a table big enough for everyone. Building a legacy. The following morning, Amara Hayes awoke to the soft light of dawn streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Manhattan penthouse. The city below was already alive with the sounds of ambition, a chorus of car horns, bustling pedestrians, and the occasional bark of a street vendor. Amara stretched, allowing herself a moment of stillness before the whirlwind of the day began. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand, a reminder that the world was still abuzz from the events of the day before. She picked it up, scrolling through emails and messages. Offers to partner on initiatives, invitations to speak at high-profile events, and countless personal stories flooded her inbox. One message, however, stood out, a note from the airline's CEO. Subject: a personal apology and a proposal. Amara. I was deeply disturbed to hear about the events on Flight 746. As CEO, I take full responsibility for the actions, or inaction, of our crew. I'd like to meet with you personally to discuss how we can improve and, perhaps, collaborate on solutions. Respectfully, David Kessler. Amara smiled. The impact of her stand was already rippling through the industry. She forwarded the email to Derek with a simple note: schedule this ASAP. Later that morning, Amara stepped into the sleek offices of her media team. The Equality Elevated Foundation had been announced just hours earlier, and the reaction had been overwhelming. Press coverage was pouring in, and the foundation's website had already received thousands of inquiries about how to donate or get involved. We've got CNN, Forbes, and the New York Times requesting interviews, Rachel said, scrolling through a tablet as they walked into the conference room. And the hashtag #EqualityElevated has been trending for 18 hours straight. Amara nodded, absorbing the information. Good. Let's prioritize outlets that align with the Foundation's mission. This isn't just about publicity, it's about reaching the right people. As the meeting continued, the team outlined a roadmap for the Foundation's first initiatives. They planned to roll out a flagship program called Wings Without Barriers, a partnership with airlines to provide diversity training, scholarships for underrepresented groups in aviation, and a mentorship program connecting young professionals with industry veterans. Derek, who had been silent for most of the meeting, finally spoke. There's one more thing, he said, his tone serious. We've been approached by several venture capital firms looking to invest in your next project. They're not just interested in the Foundation, they want to back your vision, no matter what it is. Amara raised an eyebrow. And what exactly do they think my next project is? They don't care, Derek said with a grin. They just know you're a winner. Amara chuckled. Let's keep our focus on the Foundation for now. The rest will come. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Amara's calendar was packed with meetings, interviews, and strategy sessions. The Foundation gained momentum quickly, with prominent figures in business and entertainment publicly endorsing its mission. Donations poured in, and partnerships with major airlines and corporations were formalized. One of the most significant moments came during her meeting with David Kessler, the airline CEO. They sat across from each other in a sleek boardroom overlooking the Hudson River. Kessler, a tall man with a sharp suit and a demeanor that exuded both power and regret, began the meeting with a heartfelt apology. I won't make excuses, he said. What happened on that flight was unacceptable. We failed you, and for that, I'm sorry. Amara listened intently, her expression calm but unreadable. Thank you for your apology, she said. But apologies are just the beginning. What matters is what you do next. Kessler nodded. That's why I wanted to meet with you. I believe our airline can lead the industry in creating a more inclusive experience for all passengers. We'd like to work with your foundation to make that happen. Over the next hour, they outlined a plan to implement comprehensive diversity and bias training for the airline staff, as well as policies to ensure incidents like the one Amara experienced would not happen again. Amara also proposed a joint campaign to promote inclusivity in travel, an idea that Kessler eagerly embraced. As the meeting ended, Kessler extended his hand. "Thank you for holding us accountable," he said. "You've inspired change, not just here, but across the industry." Amara shook his hand, a small smile playing on her lips. "This is just the beginning." Months later, the Equality Elevated Foundation held its first major event, the Elevate Summit, a gathering of leaders from aviation, hospitality, and business to discuss actionable steps toward equity and inclusion. The summit was held at a sprawling convention center in Washington, D.C., and drew thousands of attendees from around the world. Amara stood backstage, watching as the final touches were made to the stage setup. Derek approached, holding a tablet with the event's schedule. "Ready for your keynote?" he asked. Amara nodded, adjusting the lapel of her tailored suit. "Always." When she stepped onto the stage, the applause was deafening. The audience rose to their feet, a sea of faces representing the very diversity she had fought for. Amara took a moment to absorb the energy before beginning her speech. "I stand here today because of a choice I made," she began. "A choice to stay seated, not just in my first-class seat on a plane, but in my belief that we all deserve to belong in every space we enter. That choice wasn't easy, but it was necessary." She spoke about the challenges she had faced, the lessons she had learned, and the vision she had for a future where equity was not a goal but a standard. Her words resonated deeply, drawing laughter, tears, and countless nods of agreement. As she concluded, Amara looked out at the audience, her voice filled with conviction. "Change doesn't happen because one person takes a stand. It happens because we stand together. So let's rise, let's build, and let's ensure that everyone, everywhere, has a seat at the table." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the hall and into the hearts of those who had been touched by her journey. Later that evening, as Amara sat alone in her hotel room, she reflected on how far she had come. The incident on the flight had been a turning point, but it was the years of resilience, determination, and unshakable belief in her worth that had prepared her for this moment. Her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a text from Danielle, the aviation student she had met weeks earlier. "Ms. Hayes, I just wanted to let you know I passed my exams. Thank you for inspiring me to keep going. You changed my life." Amara smiled, her heart full. She typed a quick reply, "Congratulations, Danielle. Keep soaring. The sky is yours." As she set the phone down, Amara felt a profound sense of purpose. She knew her work was far from over, but she welcomed the challenge. After all, her legacy wasn't just about what she had achieved, it was about what she had empowered others to achieve. And with that, Amara Hayes leaned back, ready for whatever came next. The world was changing, and she was determined to lead the way.